To get started, I always like to talk about our annual data threat report, and this one is specific to our federal customers and is our federal edition. This can be downloaded at our website, and I always take time to go through the executive briefing and point out what I find to be the most influential and insightful metrics from our federal customers that all participate in this survey. So the first one, of course, zero trust is quite the buzzword these days. And as everyone continues to gain momentum in their journey towards a zero trust architecture, based on the survey, we found that 31% claim to have a formal strategy and actively embrace the zero trust policy. So that's just about a third. And as we all know, zero trust isn't a product. It's not something you can implement overnight. It is truly a journey. And so with 1/3 answering the survey with having a actively embraced policy in place, it's very encouraging, especially again, as we look at zero trust and the assumption that something is perhaps running rampant in your environment. To have 1/3 already on board in their journey is very encouraging. And then over on the right, 3/4 rely on some concepts of zero trust to shape the cloud and security strategy. I find this incredibly positive. What you'll find is when you're migrating to cloud or multi-cloud environments, because the orchestration, the automation, the scalability, everything is much easier and almost at a point click empowerment for different services and platforms in the cloud. It's much easier to implement zero trust principles when you're going through a new environment versus potentially looking at legacy systems and trying to retrofit security and zero trust architectures in those environments. So as we continue to be a cloud first everything these days, it's much more simpler, in my experience, working with customers to implement those in new environments, and of course, challenging perhaps to retrofit those into existing environments. Now, shifting gears to data breaches and threats. So at one point in time, 45% of all agencies have claimed to experience a security breach. And of course, in the last 7 months, there's been some significant data breaches. And looking back, of course, with the SolarWinds compromise, and I believe that based on our topic today with the executive order on cybersecurity, a lot was shaped from the lessons learned from that compromise, given how devastating it was to federal agencies, but also commercial markets as well. It was a different tactic, incredibly sophisticated, going through supply chain and essentially having that ultimate Trojan horse in products, of course, that you're updating in your environment that actually come back to be the culprit, unfortunately, of the compromise itself. Now, when you look at the 47s and the 48% and the remaining figures, of course, an increase in cyber attacks, increase in ransomware, phishing, whaling attacks. Last year, of course, being one like none of us have experienced in our lifetimes going through COVID, a lot of these were really targeted toward the user, the remote worker, of course, a lot of ill will. So, of course, when America and the world in general is at their weakest, trying to very quickly pivot to accommodate for COVID and to keep the lights on, the data centers running, the applications up and running as well. During that time, of course, that's opportunity, unfortunately, on the flip side by nation states and hackers, of course, to unfortunately try to compromise people, and we do continue to see data breaches. So, of course, the Colonial Pipeline, JBS, the meat processing, those were recent ransomware victims, and then EA just a few weeks ago lost all their source code and just a true data theft compromise. So it seems about every 2 weeks, we continue to see some serious data breaches that continue to happen. Now, I always, on my soapbox, talking to customers, partners, integrators, it's if we don't change the game, we continue to get the same results. And with this new executive order, as we'll get into it, there's some very prescriptive things that we, of course, here at Thales have been evangelizing for years, but it's very zeroed in on specific things that you can do to implement in your cybersecurity strategy and your hygiene to ensure that your incorporating all best practices, people, processes, and capabilities and platforms out there to ensure that you're not the next victim of ransomware or true data theft or perhaps even insider threat. So when you look at the poor visibility, security, and control, right, it's all around operational complexity. There's, of course, AI, there's ML, there's a lot of evolving business needs that are happening that are at the tactical edge. There's a lot of IoT devices out there now that not only help us become more efficient and help us respond to breakdowns more fluidly, but it also comes at an expansion of the attack surface that's out there. And even looking at just a remote worker, perhaps even BYOD devices, right? Things that do touch our network, it's more and more difficult to ensure that every entry point to your network is secure. We continue, of course, as I stated in the last slide, to see a soaring number of data breaches. You've got global data privacy regulations, GDPR, you've got old school HIPAA, PCI, and now you've got the executive order, you've got CDM, you've got CMMC. So there's a continuum, right, of iterative approaches of how we want to continue to protect ourselves from the enemy. And then when you see more and more point products, so of course in the past, typically if you failed an audit, you may go for a point product or essentially some sort of stringent band-aid and compensating controls to make it go away to pass. And, you know, unfortunately, best practices and guidelines just aren't enough these days. We really have to be on the offensive to protect ourselves, our network, and most importantly, our data. And then you look at the explosive data growth. So when you look at it, I believe this year it's forecasted that there will be 74 zettabytes of data collected. And of course, we're very, very good at data collection. Now, based on that collection, how good are we at protecting that data? And again, that's the opportunity for us to continue to enhance what we're able to do. And again, specifically with some instructions and guidelines in the executive order, we can continue to be more protective around our network and our data itself. But let's get on to the White House executive order on cybersecurity. So in Section 3, modernizing federal government cybersecurity. So within 180 short days of May 12th, the requirements are multi-factor authentication, encryption for data at rest, and also data in transit. Now, identifying and classifying sensitive data are always a continuous challenge for customers, I believe, because again, you've got legacy data, but you've got cloud first services, infrastructure, platform as a service, right? That's consuming data, data lakes, elastic. And then of course, with the growth of data, just ensuring that you're really able to have a handle on the governance and the data classification so that once you've got those instructions and blueprints and risk assessment of your environment, how do you prioritize where to start implementing data at rest encryption? And those two go hand in hand. One creates the map, the other one essentially is one creates the map and blueprint, and that gives you essentially the prioritization of where you start with the most sensitive data and perhaps the most vulnerable places. And then alongside sprinkled in, of course, everything being cloud these days to secure those services and to ensure that the cloud security strategy in multi-cloud is that you're doing everything possible to protect yourself in those environments. And then the zero trust architecture, which we will talk through as well, is you know, a very important ingredient. Now, I'm going on 8 years here at Thales, and when I saw the executive order, I look at the platform and the capabilities that we've been providing to our customers over the years, and it's almost an exact menu of what we've been providing at enterprise levels for years and years here at Thales. And when you look at our security solutions and you look at and mapping them to the executive order requirements, they're exactly one-to-one. So when you look at our platform and our ability to go out and do the discovery and classification of data, the ability to secure the identities through multi-factor authentication, whether it's on-prem or whether it's in a multi-cloud environment, the ability to do encryption of at rest and in transit, and then with root of trust, the key management aspects, to have that FIPS boundary on the back end to protect the most sensitive of anything when it deals with encryption, which is your keys, and to shore up the ability to centralize what a key management strategy looks like, whether it's supporting things that are on premise or whether it's essentially migrating to cloud, where there are a bunch of different offerings and capabilities and service you can take advantage of, but should always bring your own key material. So when you look at the requirements and you look at the platform that we've built in the last number of years, again, they go hand in hand, and we do offer platform, not point solutions, that can embrace and truly be a major ingredient in what you do in the next 180 days, minus today being June 22nd. So there's a lot you can move very quickly through here and really tackle your data-centric approaches to securing data, whether it's in use, whether it's in transit, whether it's at rest, how you authenticate those users, and of course, build your roadmap and blueprint and guide for encryption through the ability to do discovery and classification